It was a quiet morning in the old English countryside, the kind where the sun barely peeks through thin clouds, and the wind whispers through the branches of ancient oaks that have stood for centuries. In a small village near a modest castle, the streets were still, and the villagers moved slowly, as if reluctant to wake from a dream. The smell of damp earth mixed with the faint scent of wood smoke rising from chimneys. Everything seemed unremarkable. Yet this ordinary scene hides stories that have long been forgotten. Stories so slow and methodical that hearing them might gently rock the mind into a peaceful slumber. Inside the castle, in a chamber with tall, narrow windows, sat a king. Not a king of great conquests or heroic tales, but a king whose reign is remembered for his indecision and, strangely, his sleep. Ethelred, known to history as the Unready, sat at a massive wooden throne, his posture slumped, head nodding slightly as if he might drift into slumber at any moment, which he frequently did. A stack of scrolls lay untouched beside him, letters from his advisors, updates about raids, taxes, and the occasional urgent message from neighboring rulers. None of these disturbed him for long. His eyes would close, a deep sigh escaping his lips, and then he would slowly doze again. The king's advisor, a thin man with a permanent frown, tiptoed into the room, carrying yet another scroll. "Your Majesty," he whispered carefully, "the Northmen have been sighted on the coast. They might raid the town by nightfall." Ethelred's eyes opened slightly, a sluggish movement that suggested more effort than usual. "Is it necessary?" he murmured, his voice muffled by the soft folds of his robe. "Perhaps tomorrow will do." And with that, his eyes closed once more. The advisor exhaled quietly, the tension in his shoulders easing a little, though he knew the king's approach to rulership was, at best, leisurely. Outside, in the castle courtyard, soldiers practiced drills. Their movements were slow, deliberate, almost sleepy themselves. Shields clinked lightly, swords swung lazily, and commands were issued in soft tones that barely carried across the cobblestones. The villagers watched from a distance, some shaking their heads, others stifling yawns. War was supposed to be urgent, dramatic, filled with courage and action, yet here it was mundane. A gentle rhythm of repetition and predictability, perfectly suited for someone who needed, above all, a story to lull them into calmness rather than excitement. As the day wore on, Ethelred's habits became more evident. He would rise slowly, stretch his arms as if the effort of lifting them required careful thought, and then immediately settle back into his throne. Messages were read, decisions considered, and then postponed. He might nod once or twice, barely acknowledging the words spoken by his advisors, before closing his eyes again. Historians would later note that this pattern defined his reign. Battles were lost, alliances were mishandled, taxes mismanaged, yet somehow the kingdom persisted. It seemed that the world outside could not disturb the serenity of Ethelred's lethargic rule. Meanwhile, far across the English Channel, in the extravagant halls of Versailles, another king faced a different sort of monotony. Louis XVI, sitting amidst the gilded grandeur of his palace, was not asleep, but absorbed in a pursuit that, to outsiders, seemed equally tedious. He was carving tiny keys for locks, inspecting each one with meticulous attention. Outside, the rumblings of unrest began to stir the streets. People whispered about shortages, taxes, and political unrest. The air was thick with tension, yet inside the palace, the king's focus remained elsewhere. His ministers approached cautiously, leaning in to whisper updates that might have altered the course of history. "Sire, the people are restless. There are rumors of riots." Louis barely looked up, running his fingers along the fine grooves of the key he was holding. "Yes, but I must perfect this lock. Security is of utmost importance," he said softly, returning to the delicate work that consumed hours of his day. Outside, Drums of revolution echoed faintly in the distance, yet the sound seemed to fade against the slow, deliberate rhythm of his movements. In the quiet corners of the palace, servants moved like shadows, careful not to interrupt the king's concentration. Courtiers exchanged glances, some hiding yawns, others simply marveling at the peculiar priorities of their monarch. History would remember Louis XVI for events that would shake a nation. Yet these small, almost absurd details of his daily life paint a picture not of courage or daring, but of tedium, an existence that, in its odd way, is almost soothing to contemplate. Back in England, the castle continued its slow, predictable cycle. Ethelred's advisors adjusted tapestries, dusted the heavy chandeliers, and tiptoed past the chambers, all aware that the king's attention, if it was ever fully present, would vanish within moments. Even the birds perched near the windows seemed to acknowledge the calm, sleepy atmosphere, hopping quietly, pecking at crumbs without causing a stir. At dusk, the castle settled further into its gentle rhythm. Candles flickered, casting soft shadows that danced lazily across stone walls. Ethelred finally reclined completely, resting his head against the arm of the throne. The scrolls lay where they had been all day, the words unread, the decisions unmade. Outside, the village lights glimmered softly in the distance. A breeze rustled the leaves, carrying with it the quiet songs of nocturnal birds. There was no rush, no urgency, only the steady, unhurried flow of life in a time long past, a perfect lullaby for those willing to listen. And so, across centuries and kingdoms, the story of these kings unfolds not as tales of daring or heroism, but as gentle, mundane accounts of human behavior. Some may call it boring, others may call it uneventful. Yet in its very slowness, its repetitive predictability, there is a certain calmness, a quiet rhythm that draws the mind inward, encouraging thoughts to slow, eyes to droop, and the listener to sink comfortably into the embrace of sleep. The world of history is not always grand. Sometimes it is tedious, sometimes it is slow, and sometimes it is perfectly suited to those who do not seek excitement. But the gentle, steady passage of time, measured not in battles and victories, but in the soft, quiet moments that have been forgotten by all but the patient listener. Even the soldiers, the villagers, the advisors, and the birds, animated in their slow, deliberate movements, contribute to this rhythm. The kingdom exists not through action, but through inertia, not through drama, but through the calm acceptance of life as it is. And as night falls, that calm deepens. A perfect prelude to rest. A story told not to thrill, but to soothe. It is in this ordinary, unremarkable, almost sleepy way that history truly speaks. For those willing to hear, the tales of kings like Ethelred and Louis XVI are not dull. They are meditative. They are not exciting. They are serene. And they exist to remind us that not all of the past is filled with heroic deeds. Some of it simply exists, quietly, persistently, allowing anyone who listens carefully to drift gently into sleep, lulled by the slow, steady cadence of events long forgotten. The early morning fog lingered over the rolling hills of England, stretching out like a soft, gray blanket over fields and forests. The castle from the previous scene stood in the distance, its stone walls bathed in a pale, sleepy light. Inside, the king still rested, oblivious to the world outside, leaving the daily rhythm of the kingdom to unfold in a quiet, almost predictable manner. The villagers went about their slow tasks, carrying baskets of grain or water, their movements deliberate and unhurried. The occasional crow flew lazily across the sky, calling in a way that sounded more like a yawn than a warning. In the courtyard below, the soldiers were beginning their morning drills. Unlike the kings, they were awake and moving, yet even their activity followed a peculiar, almost soporific rhythm. They raised their swords and shields with the kind of slowness that made one wonder if the air itself had thickened overnight. Each swing of a sword, each step, was deliberate and exaggerated, like a dance performed in slow motion. The clang of metal was soft, muted, echoing across the stone walls rather than ringing sharply. Even the commanding officer spoke in measured tones, his voice barely rising above a quiet murmur. "Raise your shields. Slowly. Remember, the left. Yes, slower. That is, good." No one in the courtyard seemed particularly eager to rush. One soldier, a young man with a face full of freckles and a permanent expression of mild boredom, stumbled slightly and let his sword hang loosely. Another soldier glanced at him and yawned, a deep, exaggerated yawn that seemed to stretch for several long seconds. The sun climbed higher, but the pace remained unchanged. There was no urgency, no tension, only the slow, almost hypnotic movement of people performing a task they had repeated countless times. In the corner of the courtyard, a pair of older soldiers sat on a low wall, leaning on their spears, watching the drills with mild interest. They whispered to each other in hushed tones, discussing the trivial matters of their lives. The weather, the price of bread, which boots were more comfortable, and which helmet was the heaviest. Their conversation was monotonous, yet oddly comforting in its predictability. "Do you think the new recruits will last?" one of them asked lazily. "Perhaps, but they move like snails," the other replied. "Still, it's the pace that counts, not speed." Even the horses in the stables moved with a lazy deliberation. They flicked their tails slowly, chewed their hay with long, measured motions, and occasionally lifted a hoof only to set it down a moment later. The courtyard was alive, but in a very gentle, almost dreamlike way, the kind of rhythm that could easily coax the listener into closing their eyes for a few quiet moments. As the day progressed, the drills continued with the same unhurried precision. Each soldier repeated the same steps over and over. March a few paces, turn, raise the shield, swing the sword, pause, repeat. It was repetitive, almost comically slow, yet there was a strange elegance to it. In this dull, mechanical routine, the soldiers themselves seemed unaware of the passage of time. One could almost imagine that the sun moved slower in their world, that the hours stretched infinitely, and that their mundane actions were a meditation in motion. Nearby, a captain with a tired expression walked among the ranks, observing. He held a clipboard, which seemed almost ceremonial rather than practical. Occasionally, he would nod slowly, as if to acknowledge some profound insight, then move on without comment. His face was calm, almost serene, as though he had accepted that life would always proceed at this pace, that the repetition was unavoidable, and that there was a quiet dignity in simply being present, doing the same things day after day. One young soldier, curious and slightly restless, tried to add a flourish to his movements, attempting a spin of the sword that should have been elegant, but instead ended in a graceless tumble to the ground. The others glanced briefly, then resumed their slow march without interruption. No one laughed, no one shouted. The action merely blended into the gentle monotony. It was as if the courtyard existed in a bubble of timelessness, where mistakes were absorbed into the rhythm rather than punished or noticed. From a distance, the castle's battlements looked like the frame of a slow-moving tableau. A bird perched on a stone ledge, stretching one wing, then the other, its movements deliberate. Flags hung limp in the light breeze, their colors faded but soft, blending with the muted tones of the morning. It was not chaos, nor heroism, nor drama. It was a slow, meditative snapshot of life in this small, sleepy kingdom. Inside the barracks, soldiers went about the next part of their routine with equal care. They polished their armor with long, methodical strokes, examined every joint in their chainmail, and meticulously arranged their weapons. Each movement was slow, almost ritualistic. One could imagine that an observer, sitting quietly nearby, might feel their own heartbeat slow, might feel their thoughts drift gently, drawn along by the unbroken rhythm of repetition. Even their meals were carefully slow. They gathered at long wooden tables, carving bread, slowly spreading butter, sipping thin, lukewarm soup. Conversation was minimal, mostly soft murmurs about which boots pinched, which helmet felt too heavy, and which days were particularly tedious. These were not exciting tales of battle, nor dramatic stories of heroism. They were small, deliberate details of a life structured around predictability. As afternoon approached, a new group of recruits entered the courtyard. They carried shields and wooden swords, faces full of nervous energy. Yet even they were gradually lulled into the rhythm of the day. Step by step, swing by swing, their movements slowed under the influence of the courtyard's unhurried cadence. What had initially been awkward and jittery became measured and deliberate. The rhythm was infectious, drawing everyone into its gentle, persistent flow. Good. Slower. Yes, that is correct. Now again. The commanding officer's soft voice echoed across the stones. There were no sudden movements, no sharp commands, no urgency. Only the continuous, almost hypnotic repetition of drills, of steps, of swings, of breaths. The soldiers became a living clock, moving not with haste, but with a slow, careful precision that seemed designed to calm, to soothe, and to lull. Occasionally, minor accidents happened. A sword slipped, a shield wobbled, but each was absorbed into the rhythm. A stumble became a pause became part of the motion, and the monotony continued without disruption. Even mistakes were gentle, like small ripples on a still pond, barely disturbing the surface. By evening, the courtyard had transformed into a soft, amber-hued scene. Shadows stretched long across the cobblestones, blending with the muted colors of the soldiers' uniforms. The pace slowed further, almost imperceptibly. Movements became smaller, breaths longer, and the quiet settled over the kingdom like a blanket. It was a world in which time itself seemed to pause, allowing each small, deliberate action to exist fully, without rush or distraction. As night fell, the soldiers finally dispersed to their quarters. The barracks grew quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of boots or the soft creak of doors closing. Outside, the village lights twinkled faintly, casting a calm glow. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of earth and wood. Even the castle itself seemed to sigh in the gentle darkness, the heavy stones absorbing the rhythm of the day and holding it in stillness. The story of these soldiers is not one of heroism or victory, but of the slow, careful, and deliberate movement through daily life. It is in this slow rhythm, this gentle repetition, that the story finds its calmness, its sleep-inducing quality. Every swing of a sword, every step, every soft murmur is a note in a quiet, unhurried symphony designed not to excite, but to soothe, not to thrill, but to relax the mind, to invite it to drift toward rest. Even across the centuries, these images, the soldiers moving slowly, the recruits absorbing the rhythm, the courtyard alive yet quiet, remain a testament to the gentle, meditative side of history. A side rarely remembered, rarely recounted, and rarely appreciated, yet perfectly suited for those seeking calm, for those willing to observe the ordinary, and for anyone who finds comfort in the slow, persistent cadence of life as it quietly unfolds. By the end of the day, the soldiers' motions have become a lullaby of sorts. Step after step, swing after swing, breath after breath, the rhythm continues. No one hurries, no one panics. The pace is measured, deliberate, and continuous. History here is not filled with clashing swords or triumphant banners. It is filled with the soft, hypnotic, gentle unfolding of moments that could easily carry a listener into the soft embrace of sleep. The world outside may rage, People may fight and struggle. Kings may make hasty decisions. Yet here, within this courtyard, time moves slowly. And as darkness settles and the lamps glow faintly, the quiet, deliberate rhythm of the soldier's day lingers. A perfect companion for calm, for rest, for sleep. The morning light arrived softly over the quiet hills of northern Italy, spilling through the tall, narrow windows of a cluttered workshop. Inside, the smell of wood shavings, ink, and metal filled the air, forming a gentle haze that seemed to settle everything in calmness. Long benches were covered with sketches and half-finished models, each delicate piece waiting for meticulous attention. The room was almost entirely silent, except for the occasional scratch of quill on paper or the faint metallic scrape of a tool against a tiny gear. Here lived a man whose name would later echo through history, not only for the brilliance of his mind, but for the peculiar, deliberate slowness of his work. Leonardo. His eyes were sharp and focused, yet his movements were careful and measured, almost ceremonious. A small mechanical bird lay on the table before him, its wings carefully articulated in fine wood and string. Leonardo leaned forward, adjusting a tiny joint with painstaking patience, and then sat back to observe. A faint sigh escaped his lips as he tapped his chin thoughtfully, a gesture repeated countless times each day, a ritual of contemplation as much as creation. If the joint is too stiff, he murmured to himself, the wings will not rise as intended. Yet if too loose, they will fail entirely. Patience, always patience. The morning stretched on, yet no significant progress seemed to be made. Hours slipped by unnoticed as Leonardo adjusted, readjusted, and examined, then re-examined the same delicate pieces of wood and metal. His apprentices moved quietly around the workshop, occasionally offering tools or holding up sketches, their whispers soft and unobtrusive. Even the sunlight, which filtered lazily through the windows, seemed to pause in the air, reluctant to disturb the contemplative calm of the room. Outside, the streets of Florence slowly came to life. Merchants set up their stalls, children walked to the fountains to fetch water, and travelers moved at an unhurried pace, their carts creaking along the cobblestones. The city itself seemed to breathe in a gentle rhythm, synchronized somehow with the careful, deliberate pace of the workshop within its walls. Every detail, from the movement of the apprentices to the tilt of Leonardo's head as he scrutinized his sketches, contributed to a hypnotic pattern, a soft and constant pulse of calm monotony. As midday approached, Leonardo shifted his attention to another project, a flying machine designed to emulate the motion of birds. The sketches were detailed, intricate, and filled with notations that could easily overwhelm an ordinary observer. Each wing joint, each lever, each pulley was drawn with obsessive precision. He moved a model of the machine along the floor, testing balance and resistance. The movements were methodical, meticulous, and painfully slow, each adjustment taking minutes that could have easily filled hours of idle observation. The motion must be natural, the lift exact, not too fast, not too slow, he murmured, tracing the path of the tiny wings in the air. His apprentices observed silently, careful not to interrupt the rhythm. Even the most minor distraction, a cough, a misplaced tool, a sudden glance toward the window, might break the delicate cadence of the day. Time seemed to stretch indefinitely within the workshop, expanding with the slow, careful unfolding of ideas and mechanisms. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, artisans labored over mundane, repetitive tasks that required focus but little excitement. Potters shaped clay on wheels, turning the forms slowly and deliberately. Weavers pushed threads back and forth across looms in quiet, predictable patterns. The rhythm of their work, though seemingly dull, contributed to the overall sense of tranquility that enveloped the city. a gentle counterpoint to the intricate but equally slow creations of the genius in the workshop. Even the birds outside moved with a deliberate grace. A sparrow hopped along a windowsill, pausing, cocking its head, then hopping again. Its actions were not hurried, not frantic. They seemed carefully measured, like tiny echoes of the painstaking motion inside Leonardo's workshop. A gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the streets, mingling with the dust and ink to form a subtle perfume that hinted at both creativity and the gentle monotony of daily life. Hours passed, and Leonardo turned to yet another project, a mechanical lion intended to walk and move its head naturally. The device was constructed of wood, metal, and delicate string, each piece requiring exact tension and alignment. He adjusted the legs with slow, precise movements, testing balance again and again. Each attempt took time, and each correction demanded patience. The lion did not roar or leap with dramatic force. It moved slowly, deliberately, a careful imitation of life in miniature. Perfection is found in slowness. Speed ruins precision. Patience above all. The apprentices copied his rhythm, moving deliberately as they assisted, cleaning tools, tightening screws, and adjusting weights. Outside, the city carried on its gentle rhythm. Merchants called out their wares softly. Children wandered in the square with long, languid steps, and carts rolled slowly along streets paved with uneven stones. The world itself seemed to slow, synchronized to the deliberate pace of thought and creation within the workshop. As evening approached, the workshop became quiet. Shadows lengthened across the benches and floorboards. Candles were lit, their flames small and steady, casting soft light over sketches and models. Leonardo sat back, inspecting his work one last time before setting tools aside. Each creation was imperfect, yet meticulously attended to, a testament to a mind that moved deliberately, thoughtfully, and slowly through the world. Even outside, the city settled into a gentle rhythm. Windows glowed with soft candlelight, and the murmurs of conversation became quieter as families prepared for rest. The breeze rustled through the streets, carrying with it the faint scent of cooking, dust, and wood smoke. The subtle, persistent pulse of life slowed further, a gentle cadence that mirrored the workshop's meticulous motion. In this slow, deliberate world, invention itself became a lullaby. Each adjustment, each careful measurement, each repetitive movement contributed to a soothing rhythm, a narrative that was not exciting, not thrilling, but perfectly suited to calm the mind. Every observer, whether apprentice, artisan, or passerby, participated unconsciously in the cadence, absorbed into a gentle, almost hypnotic flow. By nightfall, Leonardo's creations rested on benches and tables, models that would one day inspire awe, but for now existed quietly, patiently awaiting further attention. The city outside was bathed in moonlight, streets silent, but for the occasional soft footstep. The stars above twinkled slowly, as though moving in time with the patient rhythm below. The world had settled into an unhurried pattern, a gentle meditation on the slow passage of time, the deliberate unfolding of effort, and the quiet persistence of thought and action. The story of Leonardo and his inventions is not a story of adventure or drama, but of patience and monotony, meticulous attention and slow, deliberate action. It is a story that moves like a gentle river, measured, steady, and calming, a perfect companion to those seeking the quiet, the ordinary, and the subtly hypnotic side of history. In this slow unfolding of creativity, the mind drifts, the body relaxes, and the listener is drawn into the rhythm, lulled by the careful, deliberate, unhurried movement of one man's hands, the soft sounds of a city in gentle motion, and the timeless cadence of life unfolding at its own measured pace. The morning sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting long, hazy shadows across the port city. Ships bobbed gently in the calm harbor, their sails tied tightly and creaking softly in the light breeze. The salty scent of the sea mingled with the faint aroma of fish being unloaded at the docks, creating a steady, calming rhythm that seemed to stretch time itself. Fishermen moved with unhurried steps, carrying baskets and nets, their motions deliberate, almost hypnotic. The sound of gulls drifting lazily above blended with the gentle lapping of water against the wooden piers, forming a lullaby for anyone paying careful attention. Among the crowds at the docks stood a man whose name would later be remembered far beyond the harbor walls, though the story of his voyages would be far more tedious than dramatic to the casual listener. Christopher Columbus, dressed in heavy fabrics that made each movement slow and careful, examined the ships before him. His expression was one of mild concern, eyes narrowing slightly at the ropes, sails, and the slow, deliberate preparations of his crew. "Ensure the rigging is correct," he murmured softly to his first mate. "Check each rope. I would rather take longer and be precise than rush into uncertainty." The crew, accustomed to the same tedious attention to detail, moved in slow synchronization. Sails were tied and retied, barrels were checked and rechecked, and maps were unfurled and folded again. Each action took longer than necessary, yet in the quiet, deliberate manner, there was a strange rhythm. An observer might have noticed nothing significant happening for hours, yet every tiny, meticulous adjustment contributed to the eventual voyage, even if no one could yet predict where it would end. Columbus himself stood on deck, pointing out landmarks to his crew, speaking in measured tones that encouraged calm rather than excitement. There was no urgency in his voice, no dramatic proclamations. Instead, each command was deliberate, slow, and precise. The men followed, moving with the same languid efficiency, their actions blending with the gentle sway of the ships in the harbor. Farther down the pier, Marco Polo prepared for his own long journey. Hundreds of years earlier, though in this retelling, time seemed to stretch as if the centuries blended together in a seamless, unhurried narrative. Polo's caravan was meticulously packed. Camels burdened with supplies, silk, and trinkets, each item carefully weighed and positioned. The merchants accompanying him moved with deliberate steps, checking each item, adjusting the loads, ensuring that the procession would proceed at a pace that was slow but sustainable. "Do not hurry," Polo instructed his men softly. "We have time enough if we move carefully, slowly, step by step. Rushing will achieve nothing but fatigue." And so the caravan moved, a long, deliberate procession across the uneven terrain, the clatter of hooves against dirt, the gentle sway of heavy packs, the muted chatter of the men, all blended into a soft, hypnotic cadence. The desert wind carried sand lightly across the path, creating a rhythmic whisper that seemed to synchronize with every footstep. Even the camels, accustomed to long journeys, moved with deliberate grace, their breaths slow, their heads swaying gently from side to side. Back on the ships, Columbus finally set sail, though the pace was far from hurried. The waves lapped softly against the hull. The sails creaked as the wind caught them gently, and the oarsmen rowed with slow, deliberate strokes. The horizon seemed endless, stretching lazily in every direction, and the monotony of the sea mirrored the meticulous preparations of the journey. Hours passed without incident, each moment blending seamlessly into the next, a steady rhythm that could easily lull the most restless observer into quiet contemplation or sleep. Days turned into weeks, and the expedition continued in this steady, measured fashion. Sailors went about their duties with slow precision, ropes adjusted, sails trimmed, food prepared, and logs updated. Even small challenges, like minor leaks or a sudden gust of wind, were addressed methodically. No one panicked, no one shouted, Every action was deliberate, precise, and predictable. The monotony, far from dull, was almost comforting. A constant, gentle pulse against the vast, unchanging expanse of the ocean. Meanwhile, Polo's caravan trudged on across deserts and mountains. The men and animals moved in a slow, unbroken rhythm, pausing occasionally to rest, stretch, or drink. The sound of camel hooves against the hard earth created a hypnotic pattern, and the occasional whisper of the wind through sparse trees added a subtle, calming soundtrack to the long, tedious journey. The travelers adjusted loads, measured distances, and meticulously recorded their route, each step unfolding in a measured, deliberate cadence. Even mistakes were absorbed into this rhythm. A camel might stumble slightly, a sailor might misplace a rope, an apprentice might spill ink on a map, yet each disruption was gentle, corrected slowly, seamlessly, becoming part of the ongoing pattern of life in motion. There was no urgency, no dramatic crisis, only the unhurried progression of time, each detail carefully attended to, each movement deliberate. At night, the ships rocked gently on the ocean, sails flapping softly in the wind. Columbus walked slowly across the deck, observing the positions of ropes, checking instruments, ensuring everything was as precise as possible. Stars twinkled in the sky above, distant and serene, moving imperceptibly, mirroring the patient, careful rhythm of the voyage below. The crew lay in hammocks or on the deck, breathing in sync with the gentle sway of the ship. The ocean's lullaby merged with the careful, methodical activity of every sailor, forming a calm, soothing pattern that could lull even the most awake mind toward rest. Polo's caravan camped beneath the slowly shifting stars. Fires burned low, casting soft light across the resting travelers and camels. Men whispered softly, recounting minor details of the day. Which path had more stones? Which camel had a sore hoof? Which pack was slightly misaligned? The observations were trivial, almost tedious, yet each contributed to the overall rhythm of survival and movement, and each followed the same measured pace that had defined their journey from the beginning. As days blurred into weeks, the voyages of Columbus and Polo became almost timeless, defined less by geography and more by the gentle, persistent pace of careful attention. Each action, whether raising a sail, checking a rope, adjusting a camel's burden, or marking a map, followed a deliberate cadence. Even the environment conspired to slow the mind. The endless ocean, the expansive desert, the steady rise and fall of hills and waves, the predictable patterns of stars and sun, all conspired to reinforce the calm, sleepy rhythm of the explorer's existence. Even the small, mundane interactions between the crew and the travelers followed this unhurried pattern. A sailor passed a bucket of water to another slowly, deliberately. An apprentice adjusted a strap on a camel with careful attention. Conversations were soft, deliberate, and monotonous, covering trivial matters like food rations, weather observations, and minor complaints. Nothing was urgent. Nothing was dramatic. Everything existed in a slow, gentle flow, perfectly suited to calm the mind and encourage a restful, meditative state. By the end of each day, the ships and caravans had moved only incremental distances, yet the slow, methodical pace ensured that progress was consistent. Even exhaustion was treated with measured care. Men rested, animals were tended, supplies checked and adjusted. The monotony, repetition, and predictability of these voyages created a rhythm, a hypnotic cadence that defined every moment. And in this rhythm, in this slow, deliberate unfolding of events, the story finds its power, not in adventure, not in excitement, not in sudden drama, but in the gentle, persistent unfolding of human endeavor. The careful attention, the deliberate motions, the repetitive, measured tasks, all contribute to a subtle lullaby, one that carries the listener slowly, steadily toward rest. By night, as Columbus's ships drifted under the stars and Polo's caravan lay beneath the desert sky, the soft pulse of careful, meticulous movement continued. The gentle sway of ships, the steady shuffle of camels, the rhythmic adjustments of explorers and crew alike created a pattern that was hypnotic in its consistency. Time itself seemed to slow, bending to the gentle cadence of deliberate human action. The voyages of Columbus and Polo, often recounted in grand tales of discovery and adventure, are equally stories of slow, deliberate, mundane progress. And in this slow rhythm lies a different kind of fascination, a quiet, meditative flow of events that draws the listener into its unhurried pace. A story told not to thrill or excite, but to soothe, to relax, and to guide the mind toward gentle, untroubled sleep. The first light of dawn crept gently over the horizon, spilling soft gold across fields and rivers. Villages in medieval Europe began to stir, but not in a hurried, dramatic way. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost measured, like each person had been practicing patience for generations. Smoke drifted lazily from small chimneys, curling upward into the still morning air. Chickens clucked softly, moving from one patch of grass to another, their steps unhurried and methodical. The faint scent of baking bread mixed with dew-laden grass, creating an aroma both comforting and calming. In a small European village, the townsfolk were starting their day, and each action unfolded with a gentle precision. Women carried buckets of water, their steps careful to avoid spilling a drop. Men guided carts along the dirt streets, wheels creaking softly. Children ambled behind, gathering small stones or chasing a butterfly slowly, not racing, but allowing each moment to extend, almost savoring the boredom. Every movement seemed to echo a rhythm, a cadence that encouraged calm and quiet reflection rather than excitement or urgency. Inside one modest cottage, a family was beginning the morning routine. The father, dressed in simple homespun garments, polished wooden utensils with deliberate care, examining each for small cracks or imperfections. The mother baked bread, kneading the dough slowly, methodically, as if every fold and press were a meditation. The children watched quietly, learning the rhythm of domestic life. There was no rush, no dramatic urgency. Each task, though mundane, carried a sense of careful attention and gentle purpose. Outside, the village blacksmith struck metal with deliberate force, each hammer blow measured, allowing the iron to bend and shape without unnecessary haste. Sparks flew, but not wildly. They scattered lazily, floating in the air before settling to the ground. The rhythmic clang of hammer on metal created a soft, hypnotic beat, almost like a lullaby. Villagers passed by, pausing to watch, but never interrupting. Their steps slow, their conversations soft and subdued. Even the animals participated in the unhurried pace. Horses in the stable shifted weight from hoof to hoof slowly, their ears twitching in minimal, deliberate movements. Goats ambled across the fields, chewing each bite of grass carefully. Dogs padded along the village paths, tails wagging lazily. Every being, human and animal alike, seemed to conform to the same patient rhythm that defined the village. Meanwhile, in a distant city of ancient Egypt, life unfolded with a similar unhurried cadence. Though the environment was entirely different, the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across limestone buildings and dusty streets. Workers carried baskets of grain along canals, their steps measured to avoid spilling their loads. Builders adjusted stones for pyramids with careful precision, lifting, rotating, and setting each one with slow, deliberate effort. The sound of tools against stone was rhythmic, soothing, blending into the low murmur of voices discussing tasks in the shade. Merchants arranged wares on mats, arranging pottery, textiles, and small trinkets with meticulous care. Buyers wandered slowly, examining items in detail, sometimes moving back and forth before deciding, and often deciding not to buy at all. The marketplace itself was alive, yet in a calm, methodical way, more a ballet of patience than a chaotic scene of trade. The sounds of footsteps, barter, and wind across stone columns formed a gentle background, as hypnotic as any lullaby. Even along the Nile, fishermen cast their nets with precision, pulling in their catch slowly, evenly, methodically. The river flowed gently, its waters reflecting the sun's soft morning glow. Birds dipped into the water and rose again, moving in a slow, purposeful rhythm that mirrored the actions of men and women along its banks. Life itself seemed to expand, stretching minutes into what felt like hours, and hours into a continuous, soothing, present moment. Back in medieval Europe, villagers prepared meals for the day. Bread was sliced slowly, butter spread deliberately. Children carried small plates to the table, moving cautiously to avoid dropping food. Conversations were muted, often repeating trivial details about weather, crops, or chores. Nothing was urgent. Nothing was dramatic. Every action, no matter how small, contributed to a rhythm that was hypnotic in its predictability. Farmers moved in the fields with similar calmness. Plowing, sowing, and tending crops required steady, patient labor. Horses pulled plows at a measured pace. Soil turned with slow, deliberate effort, and seeds were planted one by one, carefully spaced. Even the occasional mishap, a dropped tool or a wandering chicken, was absorbed seamlessly into the day's rhythm. Everything, from sunup to sundown, followed the same gentle cadence. In Egyptian workshops, scribes meticulously copied hieroglyphs onto papyrus. Their quills moved slowly, deliberately, forming precise lines and curves, each stroke repeated until perfect. The repetitive task, though tedious, was a practice in patience and focus. Occasionally, a scribe would pause to stretch or adjust their position, but always with measured care, never in haste. The soft scratching of quills on papyrus, combined with the distant murmur of conversation and the flowing Nile, created a hypnotic atmosphere that could easily lull one into drowsiness. Even the rulers observed the rhythm of their societies from afar. Kings and pharaohs attended brief, measured councils, discussing minor details of taxation, food storage, or building maintenance. Decisions were deliberate, often slow, and frequently postponed until absolutely necessary. There were no dramatic proclamations or heroic gestures. Instead, there was the persistent, quiet management of everyday life, attended to with care, patience, and meticulous attention to detail. The streets, workshops, homes, and fields of these ancient civilizations, whether in Europe or Egypt, were filled with actions that may seem boring at first glance, yet each was essential. Each step, swing of a hammer, stroke of a quill, placement of a stone, or measured conversation contributed to the ongoing pattern of life. The rhythm of these ordinary activities was subtle but powerful, a cadence that shaped the lives of millions while remaining almost imperceptible. Even mundane disputes were handled slowly. A disagreement over property boundaries, a spilled bucket of grain, or a missing tool was addressed calmly, deliberately, with careful attention to fairness and detail. There were no shouting matches or dramatic confrontations. Resolution took time, and that time was measured, deliberate, and unhurried. Every word, gesture, and action was part of the quiet pattern that defined life in these times. As evening approached, villages settled into a gentle calm. Fires were lit in hearths, smoke drifting upward in lazy spirals. Families gathered for quiet meals, talking softly of their day's work. In Egypt, lanterns glowed along riverbanks, reflecting in the water and casting soft, shimmering light on stone walls and canals. The flow of the Nile, the shifting shadows of city streets, the slow movements of merchants, workers, and animals all contributed to a hypnotic cadence, a gentle pulse that stretched time and quieted the mind. Evenings were filled with preparation for the next day. Tools were cleaned, animals fed, fires banked, and plans reviewed. Each action was deliberate, careful, and slow. There was no rush, no dramatics, no sudden events to jolt attention. The ordinary, mundane details of life, so often overlooked in stories of heroism and adventure, were here fully present, unfolding in an unbroken, soothing rhythm. The story of everyday life in ancient Europe and Egypt is not one of wars, grand conquests, or heroic exploits. It is a story of patience, care, and the gentle unfolding of ordinary tasks. It is the rhythmic passage of time through slow, deliberate actions, each contributing to the continuity of life. Every swing of a tool, step of a worker, or stroke of a quill forms part of a quiet, meditative pattern that can lull the mind into rest. As night fully descended, the streets, workshops, and fields grew quiet. The occasional soft murmur of voices, the distant bark of a dog, or the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze punctuated the stillness. Time seemed to stretch, and the hypnotic rhythm of ordinary life persisted, a soothing cadence that carried the listener gently toward sleep. In this slow, measured, and deliberate unfolding of life, the essence of history is revealed not through dramatic feats, but through the quiet, persistent, and often boring actions that make civilization endure. The rhythm of everyday life, repeated over and over across centuries, is a meditation on patience, routine, and the beauty hidden in the ordinary, unnoticed moments of human existence. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the misty morning of a small medieval village. Thatched roofs glistened with dew, and cobblestone streets reflected the muted gold of the sun. Villagers stirred slowly, not in excitement, but in the deliberate rhythm of habit. Chickens clucked softly as they moved from one yard to another, and the faint hum of a mill wheel turning in the distance lent a gentle, unhurried pulse to the waking day. This was the calm before the festival, a world where anticipation itself unfolded in a measured, almost sleep-inducing cadence. In the village square, preparations for the annual festival began with deliberate, meticulous care. Long tables were carried into place by a group of villagers, each step measured so that the legs did not scratch the stones. Banners, stitched from dull-colored cloth, were unfurled slowly and tied carefully to poles, ensuring they would hang evenly. A group of children followed behind, carrying small bundles of straw for decorations, their movements tentative, cautious, almost ceremonious. Every action, no matter how minor, contributed to the unhurried rhythm of the morning. The festival itself was a peculiar spectacle, filled with traditions that were both elaborate and bizarre, yet executed at an unhurried pace. One of the earliest events involved a tug-of-war between villagers and visiting peasants from a neighboring town. The rope, thick and worn, was laid across the center of the square. The participants lined up slowly, checking their grip, adjusting footing, and stretching their arms. No one rushed. The pull of the rope began almost imperceptibly, a gradual, measured tension that lasted several long minutes. Each tug and heave was deliberate, exaggerated and repeated multiple times, creating a hypnotic, repetitive rhythm that drew attention to the minutiae of effort rather than any dramatic victory. Nearby, a cheese rolling event took place on a gentle slope. A round wheel of cheese, polished smooth, was placed at the top of a small hill. The villagers and a few adventurous youth prepared to chase it. But even their running was slow, tentative, careful to avoid tripping on uneven grass or stones. The wheel of cheese rolled with a lazy momentum, sometimes wobbling, sometimes rolling straight, and the participants followed in a rhythm almost meditative in its slowness. Laughter, if it appeared, was subdued, gentle, and spaced out in long pauses that mirrored the pace of motion. In another corner of the village square, A group of older villagers prepared a mock joust using wooden sticks and low, padded barriers. Knights in wooden helmets moved in slow arcs, swinging sticks at slow, deliberate angles. Each charge lasted longer than it needed, creating an exaggerated, almost theatrical sense of movement that was comically slow. Observers watched with mild interest, occasionally commenting in hushed tones about the technique or the awkwardness of a swing. There were no crashes or dramatic falls. Everything occurred within a patient, controlled pace, emphasizing ritual over action. Even the market stalls integrated into the festival followed this unhurried rhythm. Merchants arranged fruits, vegetables, and small trinkets with extreme care. Buyers wandered slowly, examining every item, turning it in their hands, measuring weight, inspecting texture, and then placing it back with meticulous precision. Each exchange took several long moments, and conversations were filled with drawn-out pleasantries, discussions of the weather, minor disputes over prices resolved calmly, and repeated affirmations of agreements. There was no urgency, only a soothing, hypnotic cadence. Across the square, performers prepared for their acts with exaggerated slowness. Jugglers tossed small balls in rhythmic patterns, deliberately timing each throw and catch. Minstrels plucked strings of lutes and lyres with careful, measured strums, each note held slightly longer than necessary. Storytellers, tasked with recounting local legends or histories, spoke in slow, drawn-out sentences, emphasizing every syllable, stretching moments of minor drama into extended pauses. The audience listened with patience, sometimes nodding, sometimes drifting into contemplation, almost hypnotized by the deliberate pacing. Bizarre traditions were equally meticulous. In one corner, a pillow fight on stilts was set up. Participants climbed slowly onto short wooden stilts, adjusting their balance carefully. The swings of pillows were slow and deliberate, more ceremonial than competitive. Observers whispered in amusement at the awkwardness of the motions, but no one rushed. The event lasted longer than necessary, yet every extended movement added to the mesmerizing tempo of the festival. Even small acts, such as awarding prizes, were drawn out with ceremonial precision. Winners were called slowly, names pronounced deliberately, hands extended carefully for modest trophies. Applause followed, measured and spaced, emphasizing the passage of time and careful attention to every detail. The repetition of gestures, names, and minor accolades created a hypnotic rhythm, as though the very act of recognition itself was part of the festival's calming cadence. Elsewhere, villagers engaged in traditional dances. Pairs moved around the square in circular formations, steps choreographed, but executed with exaggerated slowness. Each turn, bow, and gesture was deliberate, with long pauses between actions. The music accompanying the dance was soft and measured, drums and flutes blending into a continuous, almost lullaby-like rhythm. The dancers' faces, though cheerful, showed focus and concentration, each movement performed with care, extending the sensation of slow, soothing motion for the observer. In the background, craftsmen displayed unusual inventions and curiosities. Wooden devices that spun slowly, small automata with jerky, exaggerated movements, and mechanical animals moving in hypnotic loops drew quiet attention. Children and adults alike observed them with slow fascination, noting minor quirks and adjustments. Even these devices, though intended to amuse or impress, moved at a pace that reinforced the overall slow, meditative tempo of the festival. As the day wore on, the pace never dramatically increased. Feasting was slow, conversation soft, and laughter gentle. People moved from one event to another with careful consideration, not hurriedly. Even minor conflicts, such as disagreements over space in the square or the order of performances, were resolved patiently, methodically, with repeated gestures and long deliberations. Nothing occurred suddenly. Everything adhered to the festival's slow, hypnotic rhythm. By evening, the festival drew to a close with a gentle procession. Torches were lit, their flames small and steady, casting warm light across the square. Musicians played softly, their notes drawn out, carrying a sense of closure rather than excitement. Villagers walked home slowly, carrying small gifts or leftovers from the day, animals following with measured steps. The cobblestones echoed with the soft shuffle of feet, blending seamlessly with the distant lazy call of night birds. Even the cleanup of the festival adhered to the unhurried tempo. Tables were dismantled, banners furled, and debris collected carefully, each movement deliberate and precise. Children helped, learning the rhythm of responsibility and patience. Adults moved with quiet efficiency, performing repetitive tasks with minimal conversation, yet maintaining focus and care. The village returned to its ordinary, steady pace, the festival's hypnotic cadence lingering in the air like a soft echo. As night fell fully, rooftops glimmered under the pale moonlight, shadows stretching across empty streets. The village lay still, except for occasional murmurs from homes or the soft footsteps of night watchmen patrolling at a deliberate pace. The memory of the festival, with its slow, exaggerated, and meticulous events, persisted as a gentle pulse within the community, a rhythm that mirrored the slow, patient unfolding of human life itself. The story of medieval festivals and bizarre traditions, often told as lively, colorful, and chaotic, is in reality a tale of deliberate, methodical movements, extended pauses, and slow, hypnotic rituals. Each swing of a stick, step in a dance, bite of food, or measured word contributes to a calm, soothing cadence. It is a history not of excitement or urgency, but of patience, careful repetition, and gentle, hypnotic flow. A perfect companion for the listener seeking tranquility and the slow, comforting embrace of sleep. By night, as torches burned low and the last notes of music faded, the village returned to quiet normalcy. The rhythms of everyday life, extended and amplified through ceremonial acts, continued to hum softly beneath the surface. In every step, motion, and sound, the hypnotic, calming essence of ordinary, slow-moving history could be felt, inviting rest, meditation, and gentle reflection. The morning sun rose lazily over the stone towers and wide courtyards of a medieval royal palace. Light streamed through tall, narrow windows, casting long shadows across floors, polished smooth from generations of slow, deliberate footsteps. Servants and attendants began their day, moving with a careful precision that bordered on ritual. Every gesture, every bow, every adjustment of a garment was executed slowly, deliberately, and with measured intent, as though time itself had been stretched to accommodate the patient rhythm of courtly life. Inside the throne room, the monarch was already awake, seated upon a grand, high-backed chair with intricate carvings of lions, eagles, and floral motifs. The king, or queen, depending on the time and place, observed the activities around the room with eyes narrowed in mild scrutiny. Courtiers filed in one by one, their movements constrained by decorum and expectation. Each step echoed softly on the marble floor, a sound that reinforced the slow, unhurried cadence of the court. "Your Grace," a herald intoned, moving deliberately, "the council awaits your presence. The matter of grain distribution is on the agenda." The monarch nodded slowly, rising with measured grace. Every motion was exaggerated in its precision, a deliberate display of authority combined with restraint. Courtiers shuffled forward, some carrying scrolls, others bringing quills and ink pots. Each movement, each gesture, was executed with care, as if rushing could break the fragile rhythm that maintained the dignity of the royal proceedings. The council itself was a study in deliberate monotony. Matters of state, taxation, grain storage, minor disputes over land boundaries, scheduling of court events, were discussed in long, drawn-out sentences. Nobles spoke slowly, carefully choosing words, pausing frequently to adjust posture, bow slightly, or cough softly. Each suggestion or objection was addressed in turn, and each response was delivered with the same measured pace. Hours passed with little action but immense ceremonial attention. Meanwhile, attendants moved with deliberate choreography throughout the palace. Servants carried trays of bread, wine, or small delicacies, navigating corridors with careful steps. Pages delivered messages with exaggerated caution, ensuring no scroll unfurled prematurely or parchment crinkled. The sound of soft footsteps, the creak of floorboards, the occasional whisper of silk against stone all contributed to a hypnotic, continuous rhythm that defined court life. Royal ceremonies, when they occurred, were slow, ceremonial, and filled with meticulous detail. Crowns were adjusted repeatedly, robes brushed, scepters polished and tested for balance. Each movement, repeated over and over, reinforced the hypnotic rhythm. Even minor events, a minor accolade or a presentation of a gift, took hours to unfold, each gesture and word drawn out to ensure perfect decorum. Outside the palace, the city moved at a more ordinary pace, yet even the surrounding streets seemed influenced by the deliberate rhythm of court life. Merchants opened their stalls slowly. Children moved carefully through alleys to avoid royal guards, and the clang of blacksmiths echoed with unhurried precision. Even the sound of horses' hooves on cobblestones carried a measured cadence, synchronized, as though the entire environment had adopted the patient tempo of the palace within. In the royal gardens, attendants trimmed hedges, tended flowers, and adjusted fountains with painstaking care. Every cut, every adjustment was deliberate, observed and re-observed. The gentle splash of water, the slow flutter of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional call of a bird contributed to a soft, soothing background, a natural complement to the slow rhythm of palace life. Meanwhile, in the kitchens, cooks moved in deliberate hypnotic motion. They chopped vegetables slowly, stirred soups with exaggerated care, and kneaded dough with meticulous precision. Each step of preparation was repeated multiple times, ensuring that every loaf, every dish, every morsel met exacting standards. The smells of bread, roasting meats, and herbs combined into a sensory pattern that was both mundane and soothing, drawing all present into a calm, contemplative state. Court musicians practiced softly in chambers, their instruments producing gentle, drawn-out notes. Lutes, harps, and flutes blended into a slow, hypnotic harmony. Each note was elongated, each chord sustained, reinforcing the meditative cadence of palace life. Performances for the royal audience, when they occurred, were measured and extended, with dancers moving in long, deliberate arcs, each motion exaggerated for both aesthetic and ceremonial effect. Even minor conflicts within the court were handled with extraordinary slowness. Disagreements over seating arrangements, gift exchanges, or ceremonial protocol were debated at length. Words were carefully weighed, gestures meticulously adjusted, and resolutions arrived at through extended deliberation. There were no hasty decisions, no sudden movements. Even the resolution of conflict followed the hypnotic, deliberate pace that characterized every aspect of life in the palace. As afternoon stretched into evening, the monotony continued in gentle waves. The king or queen walked slowly through private chambers, inspecting artworks, tapestries, and architectural details. Courtiers followed with measured steps, adjusting robes, whispering observations, and bowing at precisely timed intervals. Servants adjusted lighting, moved furniture, and attended to minor tasks with meticulous attention, all contributing to a hypnotic cadence that persisted without interruption. Even the most elaborate banquets adhered to this slow rhythm. Foods were served in stages, each dish presented with ceremonial care. Conversation was muted and deliberate. punctuated by careful sips of wine or measured bites of bread. Guests moved from one plate to another with intentional slowness, savoring each mouthful not for taste alone, but as part of the ritual of dining itself. The cumulative effect of these prolonged actions was a gentle, almost hypnotic immersion into the slow passage of courtly time. By nightfall, the palace glowed under torchlight. Shadows stretched across corridors and courtyards, adding a sense of quiet grandeur to the unhurried proceedings. Guards patrolled at a measured pace, ensuring safety without urgency. The sounds of the night, the rustle of banners, distant footsteps, and soft whispers blended with the lingering echoes of music and ceremony, reinforcing the rhythm of deliberate monotony that had defined the entire day. Even in moments of rest, the palace maintained its careful cadence. Attendants quietly cleaned chambers, adjusted beds, and ensured the comfort of the monarch with methodical precision. The king or queen retired slowly, taking time to inspect rooms, adjust pillows, and review scrolls before finally closing eyes to rest. Every action, though minor, was deliberate, contributing to the hypnotic, sleep-inducing rhythm of life within the walls of power. The story of royal courts and their monotonous ceremonies, often imagined as dramatic and opulent, is in reality a tale of patience, repetition, and measured care. Every gesture, step, word, and movement contributes to a deliberate pattern that shapes life within the palace. The majesty lies not in excitement or drama, but in the persistent hypnotic rhythm of daily life, a cadence that lulls the mind into calm and draws the listener into restful contemplation. Even the smallest details, polished goblets, adjusted banners, carefully folded robes, the slow march of attendants, form a continuous, soothing pattern. The kingdom itself, from courtiers to guards to musicians, participates in this quiet meditation on patience and precision. It is a history of slow perfection, drawn out over hours and days, emphasizing the beauty and calm inherent in unhurried, meticulous attention to every detail of existence. As the night deepened, torches burned low, corridors fell silent, and the palace embraced a serene stillness. The hypnotic rhythm of the day persisted in memory and in the subtle movements of night watchmen. Life, even in its grandest and most ceremonial forms, unfolded slowly, deliberately, and predictably, offering a calm, meditative passage through time for all who observed or participated. In this extended cadence, the palace and its inhabitants revealed a side of history rarely told, not of battles or intrigue, but of the mesmerizing, almost soporific precision of daily courtly life. Every measured step, drawn-out gesture, and repeated ritual contributed to a tranquil flow of time, creating an environment perfectly suited for calm, reflection, and gentle, restful sleep. The morning light filtered softly through tall laboratory windows, illuminating shelves stacked with jars, flasks, and weights that glinted faintly in the diffuse glow. The air smelled faintly of chalk, ink, and metal filings, a combination that was oddly comforting in its constancy. Outside, the wind whispered gently through the trees, rustling leaves in a slow, unhurried pattern. Inside, a scientist bent over a table, peering at a set of glass beakers, meticulously recording observations in a small, leather-bound journal. This was the quiet world of early scientific inquiry, where discoveries were slow, experiments deliberate, and the pace of work unhurried. Each step, no matter how minor, was measured, recorded, and repeated until the tiniest detail was confirmed. The scientist dipped a feather into a solution, watching carefully as the tip darkened, then waited for several long minutes, noting every subtle change in tone or texture. "Patience," he whispered, almost to himself, "is the companion of understanding." Every observation must be recorded carefully, no detail overlooked. An assistant moved around the room quietly, arranging instruments and preparing materials. Each action was slow and precise. A glass rod was placed into a solution, a burner adjusted with careful attention, weights calibrated with deliberate motions. The process of conducting an experiment was long and methodical, each step performed multiple times to ensure consistency. There was no rush, no dramatic eureka moment, only the steady, hypnotic rhythm of observation and repetition. Outside the laboratory, life in the surrounding town moved with similar slowness. Market vendors arranged goods with careful attention. Customers examined wares deliberately, and children wandered the streets, picking up stones or tracing patterns in the dirt. Even the simplest of interactions followed a measured pace, reinforcing the slow, meditative tempo that had settled over the entire region. Back inside the laboratory, another experiment involved measuring the growth of plants under controlled conditions. Seeds were planted in small pots, soil moistened with precise amounts of water. Each day, the scientist and his assistants measured tiny changes: the curvature of a stem, the length of a leaf, the number of veins visible under a magnifying glass. Notes were taken with painstaking care, charts drawn and redrawn, measurements verified multiple times. The passage of days was deliberate, marked by the slow unfolding of minute changes rather than dramatic transformations. Nearby, a glass container held a small animal, perhaps a mouse or a frog, under observation. Its movements were recorded, behaviors noted, and even minor twitches or pauses logged meticulously. Each entry in the journal was accompanied by sketches, sometimes repeated several times to ensure accuracy. The observer worked with unbroken focus, slow and steady, immersed in the minutiae of life's subtle rhythms. Meanwhile, a separate table displayed simple mechanical experiments. Gears, levers, and weights were set up to demonstrate principles of motion and balance. The scientist rotated each wheel slowly, watching interactions of teeth and pulleys with careful attention. Small pendulums swung back and forth, their arcs deliberate and measured. Observers, often students or assistants, followed the motions with rapt attention, noting every increment of movement, every variation, every slight deviation. Even failures were slow and methodical. If a solution did not react as expected, the experiment was repeated, adjusted in tiny increments, and observed again. Each minor change became part of a long, drawn-out process of understanding. There were no sudden explosions, dramatic chemical reactions, or chaotic outbursts. Instead, there was a steady, hypnotic unfolding of cause and effect, a rhythm that, when followed attentively, could lull the mind into quiet contemplation. The laboratory smelled of dried herbs, minerals, and the faint tang of metals. Each scent blended with the sound of quills scratching on parchment, glass tapping against glass, and the soft bubbling of solutions. This environment, repetitive and slow, was ideal for absorbing the subtle patterns of observation. Time seemed to stretch, minutes blending into hours, and hours into days, as the methodical pace of inquiry continued unabated. Nearby, assistants conducted a study of water flow through small channels. Tiny streams were constructed in trays, water poured slowly, and movements tracked with careful attention. Pebbles were placed one by one, adjustments made gradually, and observations recorded with measured patience. Each minute ripple, each slow eddy, became a point of contemplation, a detail to be noted and understood in a continuous rhythm of calm, repetitive study. Another corner of the laboratory was devoted to astronomical observations. Telescopes were adjusted slowly, lenses polished meticulously, and instruments calibrated with extreme care. Stars were tracked night after night, their positions recorded with patient, unhurried precision. Observers noted color changes, apparent motion, and even minor twinkles, all within a gentle, hypnotic cadence. The night sky, vast and unchanging, mirrored the unbroken rhythm of laboratory work, extending the sense of calm and methodical passage of time. Even the documentation of experiments followed the same deliberate pace. Journals were bound carefully, pages numbered, observations organized in tables, charts drawn to scale, sketches shaded with exacting detail. Each annotation, each note, was repeated and cross-checked. The act of writing became as hypnotic as the experiments themselves, a soft, repetitive motion that reinforced the slow, meditative nature of scientific discovery. Meals for the scientists and assistants were equally measured. Bread was sliced slowly, soup stirred deliberately, and water poured with care into clay cups. Conversations were muted, and even the act of eating became part of the rhythm of the day. No one rushed, no one gestured wildly. Each bite, each sip, each movement was drawn out, reinforcing the hypnotic cadence that dominated the laboratory. By evening, the sun cast long, soft shadows through the windows, illuminating floating dust motes in golden light. Instruments were cleaned, journals closed, and solutions stored carefully for the next day. Every movement, though simple, was deliberate. The pace of life inside the laboratory had created a gentle rhythm that extended to the outside world. As the town slowly settled for the night, echoing the measured tempo of curiosity and observation within the walls. Even minor experiments with chemicals, metals, or biological specimens unfolded with the same hypnotic regularity. Repetition, attention to detail, and patience were the defining characteristics. Small, mundane failures were absorbed into the process, observed and corrected, each adjustment adding to the steady, unbroken flow of scientific study. By the late night, the laboratory was quiet except for the soft ticking of rudimentary clocks, the occasional scratch of quill on parchment, and the subtle hum of air moving through open windows. The stars above mirrored the slow, deliberate rhythm inside, constant, patient, and unhurried. The world of scientific observation was a world of persistent calm, where discovery emerged not from sudden inspiration, but from slow, measured, almost soporific attention to the minutiae of the universe. The story of early science, often imagined as filled with sudden breakthroughs and dramatic revelations, is in reality a tale of patience, repetition, and gentle hypnotic attention to detail. Every observation, every measurement, every minor adjustment is part of a long, soothing rhythm that, if followed attentively, can lull the mind into quiet reflection and calm. Through days and nights, experiments continued, journals filled, instruments adjusted, and observations repeated, all at the same deliberate, hypnotic pace. The rhythm of early science was slow, persistent, and deeply calming, a quiet, meditative cadence that invited rest, contemplation, and gentle, restful sleep. The morning fog clung gently to the coastline, softening the edges of the rocky cliffs and blending the horizon with the gray sky. Ships rocked gently in the calm harbor, their masts swaying lazily as sailors adjusted rigging with slow, deliberate motions. The smell of salt and tar mixed with the faint aroma of baked bread from nearby kitchens, creating an atmosphere of steady, unhurried preparation. This was the beginning of another voyage, yet there was no sense of haste or urgency, only the quiet rhythm of meticulous preparation and the gentle sway of waves against wooden hulls. Captains and navigators moved along the docks with careful attention. Charts were unfurled on wooden tables, compasses adjusted with measured fingers, and sextants polished slowly until reflections shimmered in the soft light. Every knot tied, every rope coiled, every plank inspected was executed with deliberate precision. Even the raising of the sails followed a slow, methodical pattern, as if the wind itself had been asked to wait and move in harmony with human patience. "Observe carefully," said one captain to his first mate, his voice low and deliberate. "For the ocean reveals its secrets slowly, and only to those who are willing to wait." Sailors carried barrels of fresh water and supplies to the hold, moving in synchronized steps that emphasized rhythm over haste. Each barrel was lifted carefully, balanced, and lowered gently into the ship's belly. The creak of wood, the clink of metal, and the soft murmur of crew members created a lullaby-like background, soothing yet hypnotic. As the ship began its voyage, the gentle rocking on the waves dictated the tempo of all movements. Tasks were performed slowly, adjusting ropes, checking knots, and observing the horizon for subtle changes in weather. Even minor adjustments to the rudder were executed with exaggerated care, ensuring every movement was deliberate and controlled. The pace of life aboard the ship mirrored the rhythm of the sea itself, a steady, unbroken cadence that could lull anyone into contemplative calm. Alongside the routine of sailing, navigators recorded observations in their journals. Each note on wind direction, water currents, and celestial positions was written slowly, measured stroke by measured stroke. Charts were redrawn, coordinates recalculated, and minor discrepancies corrected with meticulous care. Every observation, though seemingly mundane, contributed to the slow, hypnotic rhythm of documenting the unknown. Days passed in a steady, repetitive cycle. Sailors rose with the sun, performed duties with deliberate precision, and ate meals in unhurried segments. The creak of the rigging, the flap of sails, and the occasional call of seabirds provided a soothing backdrop. Even small events, a bird landing briefly on deck, a wave washing over the bow, or a fish leaping from the water, were observed slowly, noted carefully, and integrated into the continuous rhythm of daily life at sea. On longer voyages, the monotony deepened, but so did the meditative quality of the experience. Observing the stars at night became a prolonged ritual. Astronomical charts were consulted, angles measured carefully, and predictions noted with deliberate slowness. The vastness of the ocean, the constancy of celestial bodies, and the patient repetition of calculations created a hypnotic cadence, a steady pulse that could quiet the mind and extend the perception of time. Even encounters with other vessels were handled with calm precision. Signals were exchanged slowly, flags raised and lowered with careful timing, messages written and read deliberately, and gestures repeated until clearly understood. There was no panic, no rush to act. Communication itself followed a patient, hypnotic rhythm. As the days turned into weeks, sailors became attuned to subtler aspects of their environment. The movement of fish beneath the surface, shifts in wind patterns, or subtle changes in watercolor were noted with patient observation. Minor adjustments to sails, rudder, and weight distribution were executed methodically. Every action, though repetitive and seemingly boring, contributed to the steady progression toward distant, unknown lands. Supplies were checked daily with careful attention. Barrels of water, stacks of salted meat, and baskets of dried grain were counted, weighed, and reorganized slowly. The repetitive motion of loading, unloading, and maintaining inventory created a gentle rhythm that extended the hypnotic cadence of life aboard the vessel. Even arguments over small disagreements, who would clean a deck or adjust a sail, were resolved with measured speech, slow gestures, and deliberate compromise. On certain mornings, fog would roll in thicker, softening the horizon into a continuous gray expanse. Sailors moved cautiously, observing the subtle outline of the coastline, the gentle swell of waves, and the whisper of wind against sails. Every movement was slow, deliberate, and repeated multiple times for clarity and safety. Observing the unknown required patience, and this slow rhythm emphasized caution and attentiveness. Occasionally, islands or uncharted land would appear on the horizon. Explorers approached with exaggerated care. Small boats were lowered slowly. The shoreline approached gently, and each step taken on new ground was measured to avoid missteps. Rocks were examined, plants observed, and minor maps drawn with patient strokes. Every discovery was integrated into the existing charts slowly, carefully and deliberately, reinforcing the hypnotic rhythm of exploration. At night, the gentle rocking of the ship, combined with the slow rotation of stars above, created a soothing lullaby. Sailors took turns at watch, walking along the deck at a deliberate pace. Journals were updated, instruments adjusted, and lines checked repeatedly. The ocean seemed infinite, yet the steady rhythm of human attention and methodical action brought a sense of control and continuity. Even storms, when they arrived, were navigated with calm precision. Sails were adjusted slowly, anchors weighed with careful effort, and commands given in measured tones. There were no dramatic rescues or sudden heroics. Every maneuver followed the hypnotic pace established by weeks of patient sailing, emphasizing controlled, deliberate action over drama. Life at sea, from the slow unfolding of daily routines to the meticulous recording of new lands, was a lesson in the gentle power of patience. Even minor discoveries, an unusual shell, a new bird, or a peculiar rock formation, were catalogued slowly, drawn into the broader pattern of exploration with care and repetition. By the end of long voyages, sailors and navigators returned with journals full of notes, maps redrawn with meticulous precision, and an understanding of the unknown that had been assembled slowly, patiently, and deliberately. The hypnotic rhythm of their journeys reflected not only the external environment, but also the internal cadence of persistent, methodical observation. The story of voyages of discovery is rarely told in terms of its slow, repetitive, and hypnotic aspects. Yet the true essence of exploration lay not in sudden adventure, but in the meticulous, patient, and deliberate attention to detail, the gentle, unhurried progression of understanding the unknown and the continuous, calming rhythm of life at sea. By the time the ship returned to harbor, the journey had become a meditation in motion. Every step, observation, and action had been part of a continuous, unbroken cadence, creating a story of exploration that was as much about patience and rhythm as it was about distance and discovery. The gentle sway of the waves, the slow unfolding of landscapes, and the deliberate actions of sailors combined into a hypnotic pattern, preparing the listener for calm reflection and restful sleep. The soft glow of dawn crept across valleys, rivers, and distant mountains, spilling pale light over cities, villages, and coastal towns alike. The world stirred slowly, deliberately, as though waking from a gentle, extended dream. Life moved in a rhythm that had persisted for centuries, subtle, unhurried, and meticulous. From the grand castles of medieval Europe to the humble cottages of peasants, from laboratories filled with instruments to ships exploring unknown seas, every scene repeated a hypnotic cadence that had carried human existence through time. In the heart of a small European village, families prepared for the day with careful, deliberate movements. Children wandered barefoot across cobblestones, collecting small stones and observing the insects that crawled lazily over the ground. Women carried baskets of water and freshly baked bread, taking steps that were measured, cautious, and almost ceremonious. Men tended to animals and fields, performing each task with patience, ensuring that every action contributed to the smooth functioning of daily life. Even minor tasks, tying a knot in a rope, sweeping a hearth, or adjusting a roof tile, were performed slowly, deliberately, with attention to detail that was almost meditative. The village square came alive gently, as merchants laid out goods with meticulous care. Cloths were folded evenly, pottery arranged in neat rows, and fruit displayed in precise order. Buyers wandered, examining every item with measured attention, touching, lifting, and replacing objects slowly, savoring each moment. Conversations were soft, punctuated with gentle laughter and long pauses. Every exchange, though mundane, was imbued with an unhurried rhythm, allowing time to stretch and extend. Across distant lands, in the courts of kings and queens, the same deliberate cadence prevailed. Courtiers moved in choreographed arcs, adjusting robes, presenting gifts, and bowing with precise timing. Ceremonies unfolded with extreme slowness. Crowns were adjusted, scepters polished, and proclamations delivered in measured tones. Even minor disputes or procedural corrections were addressed slowly, ensuring decorum and patience were maintained at all times. The palace, in its grandeur, was less a center of drama than a living meditation in motion. Meanwhile, in laboratories and workshops, the practice of observation continued at a deliberate pace. Scientists, apprentices, and scribes moved slowly, recording notes, calibrating instruments, and repeating experiments multiple times. Beakers were filled and emptied with care. Quills hovered over paper in long, attentive strokes, and mechanical devices turned with measured precision. Observations, once tedious, revealed subtle patterns over time. The repetition itself became soothing, a hypnotic reminder of the gentle, methodical nature of learning and discovery. Even the vast oceans were dominated by patient motion. Ships rocked lazily on waves. Sailors adjusted sails with careful attention, and navigators recorded positions with meticulous precision. Every minor movement, every observation of wind, stars, or current was slow and deliberate. The exploration of unknown lands was less about dramatic adventure and more about patient observation, careful documentation, and methodical action, repeated day after day in hypnotic sequence. Islands were mapped inch by inch, coastlines traced slowly, and small discoveries recorded as they emerged naturally from persistent attention. Back in Egypt, farmers continued their labor along the Nile with measured steps. Water was guided into irrigation channels, soil tended, and crops examined carefully. Life unfolded in small, repetitive tasks that, while seemingly boring, sustained entire civilizations. Builders adjusted stones with painstaking care. Sculptors refined reliefs in the sun's light, and scribes documented every minor occurrence. Each small act contributed to a continuous, soothing rhythm that persisted across generations, a testament to the patient, deliberate work that underpinned history itself. In quieter moments, villages, courts, and laboratories shared common patterns. Meals were taken slowly, bread broken, soup stirred, wine sipped with attention. Conversations unfolded deliberately, sometimes repeating minor details, sometimes drawing out observations or descriptions. Children learned patience by watching adults perform repetitive tasks carefully. Adults themselves repeated gestures, corrected minor errors, and performed mundane actions with the same deliberate tempo. Time in these moments seemed suspended, elongated by the rhythm of meticulous attention and habitual repetition. Even in festivals and ceremonies, where one might expect excitement or chaos, actions were drawn out with patient precision. Dances were slow and deliberate, games extended into hypnotic repetition, and prizes awarded with ceremonial care. The longest, most tedious moments were filled with subtle beauty. The sway of a dancer, the gentle roll of a barrel, the carefully measured toss of a small object. Observers, engaged or distracted, absorbed the gentle cadence, often feeling themselves lulled into calm, reflective stillness. At night, the world was bathed in soft moonlight. Streets, fields, courtyards, and ships were all quiet except for gentle movements. The soft shuffle of feet, the whisper of wind, the distant croak of frogs or call of nightbirds. Fires glowed low in hearths, casting warm light across sleeping faces. Even animals moved with measured steps, returning to their nests, stables, or pens with predictable calm. The day, repeated in this hypnotic cycle, came full circle, emphasizing continuity, persistence, and the subtle, unnoticed patterns of life. Throughout history, ordinary actions, polishing tools, stirring pots, planting seeds, measuring distances, or observing stars have quietly defined civilizations. These are the rhythms rarely recorded in books or recounted in stories of heroes and battles, yet they form the backbone of existence. The hypnotic, repetitive, deliberate pace of everyday life sustains communities, cultures, and knowledge across generations. Each minute, extended into hours and hours into days, creates a continuous cadence that is at once mundane and profoundly significant. Even the smallest moments, watching a leaf drift on a stream, noting the curve of a cobblestone, adjusting a sail, or rechecking a measurement, were part of this extended rhythm. Patterns repeated, mistakes corrected, observations logged. Across Europe, Africa, Asia, and the seas beyond, humans participated in this gentle flow, unknowingly contributing to the tapestry of history through patience, attention, and deliberate action. As the night deepened, sleep embraced the world gently. Villages, palaces, laboratories, and ships all fell into quiet, calm slumber. Fires dimmed, instruments rested, animals settled, and the air itself seemed to pulse with a soft, steady rhythm. The hypnotic cadence of centuries, the repetition, the patience, the meticulous care of everyday life permeated the world, inviting contemplation and serene rest. In reflecting upon the slow, unhurried flow of history, one realizes that the extraordinary is often hidden within the ordinary. The patient repetition of mundane acts, the deliberate care in work, observation and ceremony, and the gentle rhythm of daily existence are what sustained life across millennia. The seemingly boring, tedious actions of countless individuals built civilizations, preserved knowledge, and created a world of intricate, interconnected patterns. The grand tapestry of history, when seen through this lens, is a calm, hypnotic composition. It does not demand attention through drama or chaos, but rewards patience, quiet observation, and gentle reflection. Every step, gesture, word, and measurement contributes to the continuity of life, each echoing through time with a meditative, soporific cadence. And so, as dawn rises and falls again, as rivers flow and winds whisper, as ships rock gently on distant seas, and children walk slowly through cobblestone streets, the story concludes not with dramatic climaxes, but with the gentle, persistent rhythm of human existence. This is the essence of history, unhurried, deliberate, and deeply, quietly mesmerizing. The slow unfolding of life through everyday chores, repeated observations, meticulous documentation, and patient exploration is what endures. It is a history that whispers, rather than shouts, lulling the mind, soothing the spirit, and offering a sense of continuity, calm, and the gentle embrace of sleep. And as the final embers of night fade, leaving the first soft glow of dawn, the cycle begins anew. Villagers, courtiers, sailors, scientists, and laborers alike rise again to participate in the unbroken, hypnotic cadence of life, a rhythm that has carried humanity across centuries, unnoticed yet unending. In the end, history is not the spectacular, dramatic moments alone, but the steady, measured, unhurried movements of ordinary lives. Every action, every repetition, every small, deliberate motion contributes to a world that persists, quietly, patiently, and endlessly. This is the rhythm of life, the lullaby of human history, and the gentle story that carries us toward rest, reflection, and the eternal calm of understanding.